stand on the dock at Port Royal, your apron still stained from the kitchen of the Crimson Anchor Tavern. The ship before you is nothing like the merchant vessels you've seen from the shore. This one is lean, hungry, with black sails that seem to swallow the morning light. The crew moves with purpose, loading barrels of salted meat, dried biscuits, and something that smells like tar mixed with old wine. Captain Nathaniel Cross spots you in the crowd. He's heard of your work, how you manage to make tough meat tender, how sailors never leave your kitchen angry. He needs someone who understands that a crew's loyalty runs through their stomach. A man will follow orders for coin, but he'll follow them faithfully if he's fed well. You don't know this yet, but you're about to learn that food is power on the open sea. You there? He calls, pointing directly at you. You cook. You nod, though your hands tremble slightly. You've heard the stories about pirate crews, the lawlessness, the raids, the blood, but you've also heard they pay better than any merchant ship, and your family needs money. Your sister is sick. The tavern pays barely enough to keep her in medicine. Can you handle a galley in rough seas? Cross asks, walking toward you with the confidence of a man who has never been told no. I've worked in kitchens my whole life. You reply carefully. I understand heat, timing, and keeping calm when things go wrong. He studies your face for a moment, as if searching for something. Then he smiles, not kindly, but with recognition. We sail at dusk. Bring nothing but the clothes on your back. Everything else you'll find on the ship. He turns away, then glances back. Oh, and one thing. The last cook lasted 3 months before we had to let him go. He couldn't handle the pressure. Think you're stronger than that. You don't answer immediately. You're thinking about your sister. You're thinking about the coin. You're thinking about the fact that there's no turning back after you step onto that ship. I'm stronger, you finally say. The hours before departure blur together. You've quit the tavern, told your sister you're taking the job on a merchant vessel, a lie that tastes like ash. You've packed your few possessions and made your way back to the dock as the sun begins its descent into the Caribbean. The ship, which you now know is called the Serpent's Breath, seems darker as evening approaches. The crew is already aboard, and you can hear the sound of their voices, laughter mixed with something harder, something you can't quite name. Cross meets you at the gangway. Welcome to the Serpent's Breath, he says, and his tone suggests this is both an honor and a sentence. Your galley is below deck, second door on the left. You'll find it's not much, but it's yours. We set sail in 1 hour. The crew will expect breakfast at dawn, salt pork, hardtack, and coffee. Nothing fancy. We're not here for comfort. You descend into the belly of the ship, and the smell hits you first. A mixture of wood, brine, mold, and something sweeter that might be spilled rum from 100 years ago. The galley is smaller than your first room, but it has what matters. A large iron stove bolted to the floor, shelves lined with supplies, and a workspace that has seen better days. There are burn marks on the counter. A knife handle is cracked. Everything speaks of previous cooks who have come and gone. You run your fingers along the worn surface and understand, for the first time, that you're not just joining a ship. You're becoming part of a history. Every burn mark represents a meal prepared under pressure. Every crack in the wood represents a moment of chaos transformed into sustenance. This is your kingdom now, and it's smaller and more dangerous than any place you've ever known. As you organize the supplies, you hear the anchor being weighed. The ship shudders beneath your feet as the sails catch the evening wind. You grip the counter to steady yourself, and for just a moment, you let yourself feel the weight of what you've done. Then, you take a breath, push the fear down, and begin preparing for dawn. The Serpent's Breath is moving, and you, the cook, are trapped in its wooden belly with nowhere to go but forward. Dawn comes faster than you expect. You wake in your small quarters, a hammock strung between 2 wooden beams, to the sound of the ship creaking and the muffled voices of men moving above deck. Your body aches from the constant motion, a swaying rhythm that your land-bound muscles haven't learned to trust yet. You've been sleeping for maybe 4 hours. You light the stove using flint and steel. The fire catches quickly, and you understand this will be your most important relationship on this ship, that fire, and whether it obeys you. You move through the motions of preparing breakfast, soaking the hardtack in hot water, and salt pork broth to soften it, making coffee from grounds that have already been used 3 times. Nothing elegant, nothing meant to impress, just fuel for bodies that will work all day under the sun. The crew starts arriving just as the coffee reaches a boil. They come in shifts, moving through the narrow galley space with the awkwardness of men who still haven't learned to navigate around each other. Some nod, some don't acknowledge you at all. They collect their portions and leave, eating on deck or in the crew quarters. Then comes Thomas Blackwood. He's the quartermaster, which means he controls the food supplies and by extension controls much of the ship's order. He's a broad man with a scarred face and hands that look like they were built for breaking things. He enters the galley and immediately begins criticizing everything you've done. "This coffee is weak," he says, not tasting it first, just knowing it will be. "The hardtack should be in larger pieces. Men shouldn't have to chew it like infants. And the salt pork, you've used too much. We need to stretch supplies until we reach the next port." You want to explain that weak coffee is what you have with the supplies given to you. You want to tell him that larger hardtack pieces fall apart in broth. You want to point out that his restrictions make it impossible to feed men well. Instead, you listen and adjust. "Yes, sir," you say quietly. "I'll do better tomorrow." He grunts and takes a bowl of food. But as he turns to leave, he pauses. "The last cook, he talked back. He thought he knew better. 3 months, and we had to put him ashore because the crew wanted him gone. You seem smarter than that." He doesn't wait for a response. He leaves, and you're alone again, with your thoughts and the sound of the fire. Over the next week, you learn the rhythm of ship life. The crew eats together and you serve them. There are approximately 60 men aboard the Serpent's Breath, and each one has expectations, moods, and opinions about food. Some are grateful for whatever you prepare. Others are perpetually angry at the sea, angry at their circumstances, angry that breakfast isn't what their mothers made for them 10 years ago in some English port or colonial tavern. You learn to move quickly in the galley. You learn which men drink their coffee black and which ones want it diluted. You learn that cooking for pirates is not different from cooking for anyone else. In one crucial way, a full belly makes men less likely to cause problems, but it is different in everything else. These men have chosen a life outside the law. They've accepted violence as a possibility, maybe even as an inevitability. That weight somehow flows into your kitchen. On the 8th day, a storm hits. The Serpent's Breath pitches violently, and your carefully stacked supplies begin to fall. Barrels slide across the floor. Bottles break. The fire in the stove flares up dangerously as the ship lists to one side. You're trying to secure everything to keep the flames from spreading when the galley door swings open and water pours in. Not enough to drown you, but enough to remind you that you're in a wooden box floating on an ocean that has killed thousands. You manage to close the door and brace it. The fire is contained. The supplies are damaged but salvageable, and you're shaking, not from the cold, but from the sudden understanding that the sea doesn't care about your skill or your effort. It only cares about power. Captain Gross finds you in the galley after the storm passes. He descends the stairs slowly, as if testing whether the ship will still obey him. When he sees that you've saved the food supplies and kept the fire from spreading, something in his expression changes. It's not quite approval, but it's close. "Blackwood told me you kept your head," he says simply. "That matters. Out here, a man who panics is a man who gets people killed. You passed your first test." He pauses at the door. "Tomorrow we might encounter a merchant vessel. If we do, you'll need to prepare extra food for the crew to celebrate. If we're successful, can you do that with what we have?" You understand what he's really asking. He's asking if you can prepare food for a raid. He's asking if you're ready to be part of something that exists outside the boundaries of law and mercy. "I can do it," you say, and you hate how steady your voice sounds. He nods and leaves. You're alone again, and the ship continues its endless swaying and you begin to understand that every decision you make now is a compromise with something darker. You're not just a cook anymore. You're becoming a pirate. The merchant vessel appears on the horizon like a promise of wealth. You first hear about it from the crew. Their voices change when they gather in the galley, taking on an edge of excitement mixed with something harder. This is what they've been waiting for. This is what the serpent's breath exists to do. Captain Cross orders you to prepare extra rations. Meat pies, he says specifically, something the men can eat quickly with their hands, something that feels like a reward. You have flour, fat, salt pork, and dried herbs. You begin making dough in the early morning hours, working by lamplight in the galley. Your hands shape the meat pies with the precision of someone who understands that this meal will mark a moment, either victory or defeat, either celebration or despair. You don't allow yourself to think too carefully about which outcome depends on what. The crew is tense. They prepare weapons quietly, checking the cannons and the small arms. They gather in groups and speak in low voices. You overhear fragments of conversations, plans about positioning, about how many men will be on the merchant ship, about what cargo they're hoping to find. The sea has changed. The serpent's breath is no longer just a ship carrying food and men. It's become a weapon. Then the order comes to engage. You feel the first cannon fire through the deck boards. It's a sound you weren't prepared for. Not like thunder, but something more intimate, more violent. The ship shudders. Dust falls from the beams above. You grip the counter and remind yourself to stay focused. Your job is to keep working. The battle, if you can call it that, doesn't last long. The merchant vessel is slower, less maneuverable. Within an hour, it's alongside the serpent's breath, and the crew is transferring cargo, moving with the efficiency of people who have done this many times before. You hear shouting. You hear the sound of things breaking. You hear someone screaming, though the sound is muffled by distance and the thick wooden hull. You prepare the meat pies anyway. You keep the coffee hot. You have fresh water ready. When the crew comes down to eat, their faces are flushed with adrenaline and something else. Something that might be pride or might be shame, and you can't tell the difference anymore. Thomas Blackwood appears in the galley with a pile of supplies. Fine cloth, bottles of wine, spices you haven't seen in months. From the merchant ship, he says simply. Captain's orders. You can use these to improve the meals. We'll be at sea for longer than planned, so make them last. You look at the supplies and understand they represent something. They're spoils of a raid. They're proof that the crew has taken something from someone else. They're also ingredients for better food, which means better morale, which means a safer ship for you. Everything on a pirate ship exists in these contradictions. Thank you, you say, because there's nothing else appropriate to say. Over the following weeks, you use the new supplies carefully. You add spices to the salt pork. You make bread with better flour. The crew eats better, and their morale improves. They even stop complaining as much. Not because the food is perfect, but because it's noticeably better than before. And you understand something important. Your job is not just to feed them. Your job is to keep them loyal. Your job is to make them believe that this life, this violent life, is worth it. One evening, a young sailor named William comes to the galley after everyone else has eaten. He's maybe 17, with a face that hasn't learned to hide emotion yet. He asks you for extra coffee, but when you pour it, he doesn't drink it. He just holds it and stares at the cup. We took the merchant ship, he says quietly, as if you weren't there, as if he's speaking to himself. The captain said no one died. He said we were merciful. We only took cargo. He pauses. But the merchant captain, he looked at me like I was the end of his world. You don't know what to say. You're not a priest. You're not a counselor. You're a cook. So you make him more coffee and add a piece of fresh bread, which he didn't ask for, but which he needs. He eats it in silence, and then he leaves, and you're alone again, with the sound of the ship moving through the dark. That night, you realize something that terrifies you. You're becoming useful to this crew, not just because you can cook, but because you can listen without judgment. You've become part of the ship's machinery, in a way that goes beyond food, and there's no way to undo that now. 3 months pass. You've lost count of the days, though you mark them by supply runs and by the changing color of the ocean. The crew has raided 4 merchant vessels in that time. Each raid is smaller than the last. Fewer supplies taken, less cargo valuable. The sea is becoming less generous, or perhaps the serpent's breath is becoming less fearless. Captain Cross calls you to his quarters one evening. This is unusual. The captain rarely speaks to you directly except to give orders about food. You climb the narrow stairs to the upper deck, your heart moving faster than it should. You're thinking about the last cook, the one who lasted only 3 months. You're thinking about what happened to him. Cross's quarters are surprisingly small. A bed, a desk piled with maps and documents, a telescope pointed toward the horizon. He's sitting in a chair, studying a chart, and he doesn't look up when you enter. "We have a problem," he says. "The crew is getting restless. The raids are giving us less profit than they should. Some men are talking about mutiny. They want a captain who's more aggressive, who takes bigger risks." He finally looks at you. "Thomas Blackwood is leading the descent. I need to know if you're with me or against me." You feel the question hang in the air like a blade. This is not a conversation about food anymore. This is a conversation about survival. "I'm a cook," you say carefully. "I'm not involved in ship's politics." "Everyone is involved," Cross says. "Every man on this ship either supports the captain or he doesn't. There's no neutral ground on the serpent's breath." He leans forward. "Blackwood has been telling the crew that we need a quartermaster's democracy, not a captain's rule. He says we should vote on every decision. He says I'm too cautious, and that's why we're not getting richer. You understand what's happening? This is how pirate crews work. They're democracies only until a strong captain no longer commands loyalty. Then they're battlegrounds." "What do you need from me?" you ask. "I need you to cook better," Cross says. "I need you to make sure the crew eats well enough that they remember what it feels like to be safe. Safe crews don't mutiny. Hungry crews do." He pauses. "I also need to know if Blackwood has tried to recruit you, if he's promised you anything." You think about Blackwood. He's always been efficient with you, fair about supplies, clear about expectations, but he's never tried to recruit you, which might mean he doesn't see you as important, or might mean he's saving that move for later. "No," you say. "He hasn't." Cross nods, as if this is exactly what he expected. "Good. Keep it that way, and feed the crew better than you ever have before. Over the next 2 weeks, you pour everything into the galley. You stretch your supplies creatively. You make stews that are hearty and filling. You bake bread that's still soft even after sitting for days. You make sure every man is satisfied when he eats. You're not doing this to be kind. You're doing it because you understand that food is politics, and the better you cook, the safer you are. The tension on the ship is visible in the way men move, in the way they look at each other. It's like watching a rope being pulled from both ends, knowing that eventually something has to break. Then, one morning, Blackwood comes to you privately in the galley. "Captain's worried," he says. It's not a question. You can see it in his eyes. He's got you cooking like you're trying to win an election. He sits down on a barrel and watches you work. "I'm not going to hurt you, if that's what you're thinking. I just want you to understand something. Cross is a good captain, but he's old. He's afraid of taking risks. I'm offering the crew something better. Real democracy, real profit sharing, real control over our own fate." You continue chopping vegetables, not looking at him. "I'm just a cook," you repeat. The same line you used with Cross. "Exactly," Blackwood says. "You see everything. You hear everything. You know which men are angry and which men are content. That makes you important, more important than you think." He stands up. "When things change, and they will, I want you to remember that I was respectful to you. I want you to remember that I didn't threaten you." He leaves, and you're left standing in the galley with a knife in your hand, and the understanding that you've become a piece in a larger game. 2 days later, the mutiny happens. It's not violent, or at least not as violent as it could have been. Captain Cross is confronted by the crew during morning assembly. They give him a choice: accept Blackwood as co-captain or step down completely. For a moment, you think Cross might fight. You think there might be blood, but instead, he looks at Blackwood, then at the assembled crew, and something in his expression changes. He looks tired. He looks like a man who has been captain for too long and is tired of making decisions that everyone will judge. "I'll step down," he says simply, but I'll stay on as navigator. Blackwood, the ship is yours. It happens that quickly. The Serpent's Breath has a new captain, and you're still standing in the galley with a knife in your hand, trying to understand what this means for your future. Blackwood's first act as captain is to call a crew meeting and explain his vision. More raids, faster turnarounds, higher profit shares, better weapons. He speaks about freedom and fairness, about a crew united by mutual benefit rather than by fear. The men listen and they cheer, and you watch from the galley stairs and understand that they want to believe him. They want to believe that this change will make them richer and safer and more powerful. It doesn't work that way. Within a week, the first problems emerge. Blackwood decides that every major decision should be voted on by the crew. Which route to take, which merchant vessels to target, whether to repair the ship or push for one more raid before maintenance. The discussions go long into the night. Arguments break out, strong voices dominate, and quieter men don't get heard. You're affected directly when Blackwood decides that food rationing should also be subject to crew vote. He calls a meeting and asks the men to decide whether to eat 3 times a day or twice a day to stretch supplies longer. We can make more profit, he argues, if we don't spend as much on food. We can raid more aggressively if we're willing to be hungry for a few days between ports. You want to object. You want to explain that hungry men make mistakes, that hungry men get angry, that hungry men are dangerous, but you're not given a vote. You're not part of the crew's democracy. The crew votes for 3 substantial meals a day. They're not ready to sacrifice comfort yet. But the vote is close, and you understand that Blackwood has planted a seed. Eventually, they might choose differently. More troubling is what happens with the crew's hierarchy. Without a captain's clear authority, disputes start arising. 2 men fight over a sleeping space. Another man accuses someone of stealing his rum. Without clear punishment, without a clear enforcer, the minor conflicts start growing into larger ones. One morning, William, the young sailor who came to you months ago with confusion about the raid, comes to the galley looking worse than before. His left eye is swollen and turning purple. What happened, you ask, though you think you already know. Argument over something stupid, he says. A debt from cards. The other guy wanted payment, and when I said I didn't have it, he hit me. William sits down heavily. With Cross, everyone knew what the rules were. Break a rule, get punished. Fair and clear. Now there's no rule. There's just whoever is stronger. You give him a cloth with cold water and some bread. He eats silently, and you understand that Blackwood's vision of democracy is already failing. Men don't actually want freedom. They want safety, even if that safety comes from a captain they fear. 3 weeks into Blackwood's command, you wake to screaming above deck. You climb up to find that a ship has been spotted, not a merchant vessel, but a naval patrol boat. It has a flag, and it means someone in authority has noticed the Serpent's Breath and isn't happy about it. The crew is in chaos. Some men want to run, some want to fight. The discussions are endless, and during all this discussion, the patrol boat is getting closer. You watch Blackwood try to lead through consensus, and it's like watching a man try to steer a ship by asking every sailor which direction they prefer. Decisions don't happen. Arguments multiply. The Navy is getting closer. Finally, after hours of pointless debate, Blackwood makes a decision unilaterally, the first time he's done so since becoming captain. Run, he says. Now, the crew scrambles to adjust the sails and prepare the ship. For several hours, there's genuine danger. The patrol boat chasing, the Serpent's Breath pushing hard, the crew working desperately to either escape or prepare for combat. Then, finally, the patrol boat breaks off. It can't keep up. The Serpent's Breath is faster, but the damage to Blackwood's authority is done. He held back from that decision for weeks, and as soon as he made it alone, he contradicted everything he'd promised about crew democracy. That night, you hear men talking quietly in the crew quarters. They're questioning Blackwood's leadership. They're saying maybe they were better off with Cross. The cycle is beginning again. Winter approaches, and the sea becomes meaner. The Serpent's Breath has taken on supplies at a small port in Jamaica, and you've stored dried fruits, fresh vegetables, salted fish, and flour. The crew is tense because they know the winter months mean fewer merchant vessels, fewer opportunities to raid, and longer stretches between income. Blackwood, sensing the crew's frustration, decides to be more aggressive. He pushes toward shipping lanes, known to be heavily traveled, even though they're also more heavily patrolled. The crew votes on it, and the vote is close. The men want profit, even if it means increased danger. You prepare yourself for conflict. You stock extra bandages in the galley, because you've learned that the galley often becomes a makeshift hospital after raids. You prepare simple broths and foods that are easy to swallow for men who are injured or traumatized. The first raid happens on a gray morning when the sea is rough and the sky is the color of old bruises. The merchant ship is Dutch, carrying spices and sugar. The crew of the Serpent's Breath attacks, and this time there is blood. One of your crew, a man named Marcus, who always asked for extra bread, is struck by a falling piece of the mast. His leg is broken badly, and he's brought down to the galley because there's nowhere else to put him. You're not a doctor, you're a cook, but there's no doctor on the Serpent's Breath, so you do what you can. You clean the wound. You help set the leg with splints made from spare wood, and you give Marcus enough rum to make the pain bearable. He screams, and you hold his hand, and you understand that this is part of the job now. This is part of being the person who keeps the crew functioning. Marcus survives, but he'll never work a ship again. His leg will heal, but it won't be strong enough for climbing or hauling. Blackwood votes with the crew on what to do with him. The vote is that he should stay on the ship until the next port, where he'll be left to figure out his own future. This is the moment you understand the difference between a captain like Cross and a captain like Blackwood. Cross would have simply made a decision and explained it, and men would have accepted it because they'd chosen him to be the final authority. Blackwood makes the crew vote on leaving an injured man at port with no money and no prospects, and the crew does it, and now everyone carries the guilt. You feed Marcus better than you feed anyone else. You make sure he gets the best portions, the most broth, the most soft bread. It's a small rebellion, and nobody stops you because everybody knows it's coming from a place of mercy, not politics. Over the next weeks, you notice changes in the crew. They're becoming harder. They're becoming more willing to hurt people during raids. They're becoming willing to take bigger risks. Blackwood is pushing them toward this because he believes it will make them more profitable, more powerful. And he's right. The profits are increasing, but something else is being lost. You find yourself cooking for men who are becoming less human. You're feeding people who are beginning to believe that violence is an acceptable solution to every problem, that mercy is weakness, that fear is better than respect. One evening, you're alone in the galley when Thomas Blackwood comes down. He's drunk, which is unusual for him. I'm doing well, he says to no one in particular. The crew respects me. We're making more money than we ever did under Cross. We're taking more ships. We're becoming more powerful. You don't respond, and he continues. But they don't like me, he says, and there's something broken in his voice. They like what I give them, money, excitement, danger, but they don't like me. Cross was different. People liked Cross. People wanted to follow him, even when he made unpopular decisions. You look at him and see, for the first time, a man who is afraid. He's gotten what he wanted, leadership, and discovered that it's lonelier and harder than he expected. You're a good captain, you say carefully. You've made the crew stronger. Strong, Blackwood repeats, like it's a word he doesn't understand. Maybe that's all that matters. Maybe liking me is less important than being strong. He stands up, suddenly steady again, as if he's pushed something back down inside himself. Keep making good food, cook. Keep keeping the crew satisfied. He leaves, and you understand that the Serpent's Breath is a ship now, but it's not a home. It's a machine designed to take things from other people, and machines don't need to be liked. They just need to function. The storm arrives without warning in late winter, a hurricane that seems to come from nowhere, turning the sea into something alive and furious. The Serpent's Breath is caught in it, and for hours, survival is the only goal. You lash yourself to the stove in the galley because the alternative is being thrown across the small space by the violent motion. The fire goes out almost immediately, and you're thrown into darkness except for the gaps in the deck boards where lightning illuminates the chaos above. You hear the cracking of wood, you hear men screaming, you hear the sound of the sea winning, and then, gradually, the storm passes. The ship is still moving. You're still alive. You make your way above deck and find that the Serpent's Breath has survived, though barely. A section of the mast is splintered. Several barrels of supplies have been lost. 3 crew members are dead, washed overboard during the worst of it. The crew is devastated and quiet. Nobody talks about democracy anymore. Nobody argues about decisions. Survival has stripped away all the politics, and for a moment, the Serpent's Breath is just a ship trying to stay alive, with a crew just trying to make it to the next sunrise. Blackwood orders repairs. He orders you to assess the food situation. What you find is sobering. The storm has destroyed a significant portion of your supplies. You have enough for maybe 3 more weeks at rationing levels. After that, you're eating whatever you can catch or find. You calculate carefully and call for volunteers to help you repair what can be repaired and secure what can be secured. Several crew members come to help, working alongside you in a way that feels almost cooperative. There's no argument about hierarchy, no debate about fairness. There's just work and the understanding that everyone is dependent on everyone else. One evening, during the repairs, William comes to help. He's grown since he first came to you with questions about the raid. He's becoming one of the crew, learning their ways, adapting to the violence and the uncertainty. As you work together, he tells you something. "I've written a letter," he says quietly, "to my family. I've hidden it with instructions for what should happen if I die. I wanted someone to know that I didn't choose this life. I wanted them to know that I was trying to survive." You look at this young man and see someone who is being crushed by the weight of choices, both his own and the choices made for him by circumstance. You don't tell him what to do. You just listen, and you give him extra food, and you pretend you didn't hear him say these things. The repairs take a week. The crew works without complaint, and by the end, the Serpent's Breath is seaworthy again. Though it's clear to everyone that it's been damaged, it's slower now. It will need serious repairs at a proper port. Blackwood makes the decision to head toward Port Royal, where there are shipwrights who can help. The crew votes on it, and everyone agrees. They're tired, they're scared, and they need to get this ship fixed. As you continue sailing, you notice something important. The crew has changed. The violence hasn't disappeared, but it's been contextualized. They've been humbled by the sea, and humility is the one thing that can teach pirates how to be men again. Port Royal appears on the horizon like a promise of normalcy, though normalcy is the last thing Port Royal offers. It's a place where pirates gather, where sailors can drink and gamble and forget, if only for a few days, what they've done and who they've hurt. It's also a place where naval officers wait in taverns, where bounty hunters watch the docks, where no one is truly safe. The Serpent's Breath docks, and Blackwood gives the crew shore leave. Half the crew goes immediately to the taverns. The other half stays aboard or helps with repairs. You stay in the galley, restocking supplies, taking advantage of Port Royal's markets to get fresh vegetables and meat. For the first time in months, you can think about cooking something that isn't survival food. Thomas Blackwood finds you in the market, negotiating with a merchant for fresh fruit. He looks different in Port Royal, less like a captain, more like a man in over his head. He's getting drunk regularly, and it's showing. "Captain Cross is here," he says. It's not a greeting. In one of the taverns, he's been drinking and telling stories about when he was captain. The crew loves him for it. You don't know what to say, so you ask the obvious question. "What will you do?" "What can I do?" Blackwood says. "I can't kill him. He was a good captain, and the men respect him. If I hurt him, I'll lose what's left of my authority." He pauses, "But I also can't ignore him. His presence undermines everything I've built." Over the next days, tension builds on the ship. Captain Cross comes aboard several times, ostensibly to visit old friends. Each time, he and Blackwood have cold conversations about the ship's condition. the crew status, the future direction. Each time, the conversation is civil but filled with implications. You're in the galley one afternoon when Captain Cross descends the stairs looking for you specifically. "I want to know something," he says. "How has Blackwood treated you? Has he been fair?" You think carefully about how to answer. "He's been fair," you say. "He's followed my recommendations about food stores. He's not blamed me for shortages that weren't my fault." Cross nods slowly. "He's using you, you know. He's using your competence to keep the crew satisfied, to keep them loyal to him. It's not malice. It's just how leadership works. He needs you to believe you're important." "I am important," you say. "The crew needs to eat." "Yes," Cross agrees. "They do. And you're good at what you do." He sits down on a barrel, suddenly looking very old. "I'm leaving the Serpent's Breath," he says. "I'm taking a merchant position on another vessel, going legitimate again, or as legitimate as a man with my history can get. I wanted you to know that if you ever want to leave this ship, I can help you find a position on another vessel. No judgment, no asking questions. You feel something in your chest loosen slightly. You haven't let yourself think about leaving, about the possibility that this doesn't have to be permanent, but now you are thinking about it. I'll remember," you say. Cross stands and moves toward the stairs, then pauses. "Blackwood isn't a bad man," he says, "but he's learning that being a captain requires you to make decisions that hurt people. He's learning that leadership means living with the weight of choices. He's changing because of it. Watch what he becomes. It matters." Then he's gone, and you're alone with the understanding that the Serpent's Breath is at a crossroads. Blackwood is beginning to understand that democracy isn't working, that the crew needs structure, that his vision of fairness isn't compatible with survival on the sea. He's going to have to make a choice about who he wants to be as a captain. Blackwood doesn't come aboard the ship for 3 days after Cross leaves Port Royal. When he finally appears, he looks like he's made a decision. He calls the crew to assembly and announces that he's returning to a more traditional captain structure. He explains that the crew votes on location and target selection. That part stays, but day-to-day decisions, punishment, and resource allocation will be his responsibility again. The crew is surprised, but you notice, relieved. Most men don't actually want complete democracy. They want enough voice to feel heard, but they want someone else to make the final decisions and take responsibility for the consequences. Blackwood is changing. You watch it happen over the following weeks. He becomes less concerned with being liked and more focused on being effective. He makes decisions quickly and clearly. When a man breaks a rule, punishment is swift. When a man does good work, recognition is immediate. It's not dictatorship, because the crew still has genuine say in major matters. But it's not democracy either. It's something in between, a balance that seems to actually work. With Blackwood more focused on ship operations, he starts paying attention to things he'd neglected before. He notices that you're cooking better than you should be able to with the supplies available. He notices that crew morale is stable despite the dangers and hardships. He comes to you one evening and asks directly, "How are you keeping them satisfied?" "I stretch things," you say. "I'm creative with what I have. I listen to what the men need and try to provide it." You pause. "I also don't waste anything. Every part of the animal, every scrap of grain, nothing gets thrown away." Blackwood nods slowly. "That's good," he says. "That's not just cooking. That's respect for resources. That's survival thinking." He sits down and does something he rarely does. He just talks to you like a person rather than an employer. "I've been thinking about retiring," he says. "After one more year. I've made enough money. I could settle somewhere, maybe take a legitimate merchant position, maybe just live quietly. But I don't know if I can go back to being normal after this. I don't know if I can be around people who haven't killed or stolen or hurt others in the way I have." You listen, because listening is what you do. You're a cook, but you've become a confessor as well. Maybe that's part of why you're good at this. You say carefully. You don't pretend it's something other than what it is. You've accepted the contradiction of being a pirate and a leader. Blackwood looks at you with something like gratitude. "I needed to hear that," he says. The final chapter of the Serpent's Breath begins when naval intelligence finally catches up to what the ship has been doing. A proper military vessel, not just a patrol boat, but a warship with real firepower is sent to capture or destroy the pirate ship. Word reaches the crew through the underground channels that connect all pirate vessels, and Blackwood calls a genuine assembly to decide how to respond. The crew votes, and there are 3 real choices: scatter the ship and try to disappear into small groups, fight the warship directly, or negotiate for amnesty. The vote is split. Some men want to fight, some want to scatter, some are willing to take amnesty if they can get it. After hours of discussion, a compromise emerges. They'll scatter the ship's crew, sell the Serpent's Breath for parts, and each man will take his fortune and go his separate way. It's not romantic, it's not glorious, but it's practical. Before the crew officially disbands, Blackwood does something unexpected. He calls a meeting where he publicly thanks everyone, including you. He stands in front of the entire crew and talks about what they've accomplished together, not the violence, but the survival. He talks about the storms they've weathered, the decisions they've made together, the way they've challenged each other and sometimes failed, but always kept trying. The cook, he says, looking directly at you, has kept us alive not just with food, but with the dignity of respecting what we eat, where it comes from, and what it means to have enough. That matters more than any raid ever did. The crew applauds, and you feel something shift inside. Not redemption, exactly, but acknowledgement. You've participated in things that aren't good, but you've also been part of something that had structure and meaning and moments of genuine human connection. When it's time to leave the ship, you have enough money saved that you could retire. You have options. You could take a legitimate position. You could start a restaurant. You could go home and see your sister. But instead, you take a position on another ship, not a pirate, but a merchant vessel, sailing legitimate trade routes. The captain is fair. The work is honest. And there's no pretense about what you're doing or why. You're a cook on a merchant ship, and that's enough. Years later, you'll hear stories about what happened to the crew members who scattered from the Serpent's Breath. Some settled down, some died in conflict, some became legitimate merchants, and Thomas Blackwood, you'll hear, actually did retire. He settled in Barbados and became a businessman, still using violence and intimidation, but now through legitimate channels, which somehow seems both better and worse at the same time. You never see William again, but one day a letter arrives at your boarding house from Jamaica. It's from him. He tells you he took amnesty and joined the Navy. He became a warrant officer. He spent 10 years helping catch pirates, like the ones he used to sail with. He says he thinks about the galley sometimes, about the coffee, about the bread, about the time someone fed him extra portions, and listened to his confusion without judgment. The letter ends, "Thank you for teaching me that survival sometimes means being kind when no one is watching. That mattered more than I can say." You never reply to the letter, but you keep it. And when you cook, you still think about the Serpent's Breath, not with nostalgia, but with the complicated understanding that nothing in life is simple. You were part of something that was both terrible and human. You cooked for men who were both victims of circumstance and perpetrators of violence. You survived in a world where morality was negotiable, and survival was the only truth that mattered. And through it all, you fed people. You kept them alive. You gave them moments of comfort in a life that offered little comfort. Maybe that's not redemption, but it's something. The sea moves on. Ships are built and destroyed. Crews gather and scatter. And somewhere, another cook is learning what it means to feed men who live outside the law, finding dignity in impossible circumstances, understanding that sometimes survival is the only victory available. The Serpent's Breath is gone now. The ship was broken up and sold for timber, but the story remains. The story of a cook who kept an impossible crew alive, who witnessed the transformation of a leader, who learned that humanity persists even in the darkest circumstances. That's your legacy, not violence, not wealth, not power, just the memory of keeping people fed and alive and sometimes slightly less broken than they might have been otherwise.